They've done studies, 60% of the time, it works every time.
Oh, if Jeremy Hill can hold on to a fucking football.
That doesn't make sense.
You're listening to the P&E Bengals Fan Podcast.
3, 2, 1.
What's up, Pete? As you know, today we're going to be taking calls from Bengal Nation. But before we get into that, let's just do a quick little couple-minute recap of the week so far.
Okay, sounds good to me. I like guests from Bengal land. I like to hear from other fans to see what they're thinking, and it's just good to hear from them.
So I just wanted to do a quick little couple of minutes before we got into the calls. We were talking about Andre Smith, but what else is going on this week in Bengal Nation?
Nothing too much shaking. I think everybody's waiting for the draft to kind of see how things shake out for rosters, and then I think you'll see some of the other free agents move. I think it's interesting that Leon Hall has not found a home yet. I'm really kind of hoping that we still bring him back. I think he'll be serviceable as a backup safety if needed. I'm pretty sure Reggie Nelson is not going to come back, because you would have thought if he was going to come back, they would have signed him already.
Right, he's been on the limb a little while so far.
Yeah, and the thing is, you hope after having such a nice Pro Bowl year, he'll drag himself a nice contract. I'm kind of surprised a team like the Chargers didn't snatch him up, seeing that Weddle moved on.
So you don't see him coming back at all, even, with a discount or anything like that?
Nelson, the only way Nelson comes back is if he searches the market, he doesn't find anything great, and he kind of realizes that maybe at his age he's not going to get the big contract, and then we can get him on the cheap. But unless we get him at the price we really want him, I don't really see Reggie Nelson coming back.
I'd like to see him back, not at a premium or anything, but just because he was so effective last year, just to kind of keep the defense more together. But,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, don't get me wrong. I wouldn't be mad if he came back, but I would definitely be surprised. Safety is a position in this league that it's hard to find a good safety. So you would think that somebody would cough up the do-re-mi to at least get him on a 2 or 3 year contract, and maybe the first year or two guaranteed, and then the third year kind of a team option kind of thing. And I could see him getting something like that at his age.
All right, and we were talking a little bit earlier about A.J. McCarron. You want to elaborate on the discussion?
Yeah, A.J. McCarron is definitely a good trade bait, because it seems like the quarterback position is obviously it's the most important position in the league, and there's lots of teams out there that have needs. But I just don't see the Bengals trading him. I think that for so long we dealt with people like Josh Johnson at backup, which doesn't inspire anything, and we all know that you're one hit away from using your backup. And
as we saw this last year, yeah,
he knows the system, he knows our receivers, he knows what we're doing, he's comfortable here. To be honest with you, I think that another thing about not trading McCarron is how far can Andy Dalton take us? And I'm wondering if Andy Dalton goes another year or two, will the Bengals be willing to let Dalton go and let A.J. McCarron take the reins at that point?
All right, well, with that being said, let's get into our calls.
Okay, sounds good. Who's the first caller?
So we got a call from Sam.
Sam, I am.
It's the word on the street.
Playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs. You kidding me? Playoffs?
Boy, I said, boy, why don't you go ahead on and ask me a question?
Hello, Erskine and Pete. Thanks for having me on the show. My name is Sam from Cincinnati, representing the Bengals. I got two questions for you. The first question will be regarding the playoffs, and if the Bengals do not win, will the Bengals let go of Marvin Lewis, and will they move on from Andy Dalton? The second question will be regarding Vontaze Burfict, our troublesome but talented Pro Bowl linebacker. With his suspension of 3 games, do you think that will make him change, or do you think Vontaze is on to be Vontaze and continue his style of play?
Ooh, that's a good one. That's right into what you were talking about.
Those are two really big questions, and I think those are two of probably the biggest questions that are on the minds of Bengals fans right now, to be honest with you. We'll tackle the first question first, because that one's the easiest. No matter what we do in the playoffs or not in the playoffs, Marvin Lewis will not be fired. I think it's interesting when you hear the national media discuss that every year. You know, the Bengals lose in the playoffs, and then, you know, you get, you know, retards like Stephen A. Smith. And by the way, anybody who ever listens to Stephen A. Smith, you need to up your standards on what you expect out of your sports analysis, because Stephen Smith and the other joker he goes with, I can't remember his name, but they're both just sensationalist reporters. They just try to report something that will cause controversy, and they actually don't give you any real in-depth analysis or anything like that. I think they're both kind of useless. But in either case, to answer the question, Marvin Lewis will never go unless he wants to go. The thing about Mike Brown is, as long as we're selling out seats, he doesn't really care either way. I mean, he really doesn't. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure Mike Brown would like to win a Super Bowl, but Mike Brown is a businessman first and foremost. And as long as the Bengals are selling out seats, especially after the debacle that the 90s was, and the thing is, the funny thing about that is, everybody really blamed Mike Brown when the Bengals were doing so bad in the 90s, and, you know, everybody was starting those movements like, you know, replace Mike Brown. But you don't hear that as much when it's some success. And the thing is, unless Marvin Lewis has a 0-16 season or something of that nature, even then, I'm not sure if Mike Brown would get rid of him. First and foremost, as long as we're selling out seats and we're having some nominal, some kind of small success, Mike Brown will never fire Marvin Lewis. Never, never, ever. Mike Brown is traditionally very loyal to his coaches. I think the best example would be Bruce Coslet. When he was our coach, he basically lost the faith of the team, and Mike Brown still wouldn't fire him. Like, he basically had to resign himself because Mike Brown just wasn't going to fire him. He believes in backing his coaches, and I think we've seen that over the years enough to know that as long as we're selling seats and Mike Brown's making money, he doesn't see any need in changing a coach. And not only that, but I think at this point Marvin Lewis has kind of ingrained himself into the front office. So unless Marvin Lewis himself wants to step down, I just don't see it happening. And especially, you know, which, like I said before, the national media is always like, oh, they should fire Marvin Lewis. And it shows you just how far off the national media is when they cover the Cincinnati Bengals, how much they don't understand the Cincinnati Bengals history, how much they don't even bother to learn about the culture in Cincinnati. They hold Cincinnati Bengals to the same standard as they do other NFL teams. And to be honest with you, we are not like other NFL teams. We just are not. Mike Brown is diehard loyal to his coaches, to his staffs. He runs it the old mom and pop style, which, you know, to me personally, there's nothing wrong with that. I think loyalty is a quality that is lost in today's America. But at the same time, as long as we're finding success, we go to the playoffs, there's no chance that Marvin Lewis will ever be fired. So as soon as I hear that at the end of a year, when you have people like, oh, they should fire Marvin Lewis, I'm like, well, first of all, maybe you should do your job and find out what the Bengals are about before you spout out anything like that, because it's just never going to happen. And for people to expect it to happen, I just really don't know what to tell you. That's not the way the Bengals run. That's not how they do business. And it will never be that way as long as Mike Brown is the owner of the Cincinnati Bengals. It just never will be that way. As far as Andy Dalton himself, I think, is a curious case at this current moment because, once again, I think the Bengals organization itself loves Andy Dalton, especially now that Andy Dalton has seemed to take the leap. He was doing very well last year before the injury, but I think with A.J. McCarron behind him, as we were previously mentioning, if they feel A.J. McCarron can take the reins in a couple of years, Dalton's contract is built so that it's almost a year-by-year contract. If they were going to trade anyone at this point, I think they would trade Andy Dalton before they would trade A.J. McCarron. I think McCarron, as it stands, is probably the future of the Bengals. If you can get another 2 years out of Andy Dalton before McCarron reaches the free agency period, I think at that point, then you have to look at the situation. And I think it really depends on, in the next year or two, you know, how Andy Dalton progresses or maybe does not progress. So I think Andy Dalton's up in the air. But if you're asking if it's going to boil down to next year, then I would have to answer no, they will not get rid of Andy Dalton, even if we go to the playoffs next year and we lose, unless Andy Dalton has a Carson Palmer-like playoff game to where he throws 4 picks and he fumbles twice. And at that point, maybe if Andy Dalton loses the confidence of the team and the team feels confident that McCarron can take the reins, that would be the only way. But even then, I don't see the Bengals putting Andy Dalton in a position where he can throw 4 interceptions in a game. I just don't see that happening. So, if our defense is stout enough that, we shouldn't be falling behind 38-0 or whatever. But then one never knows. But Marvin Lewis, no. 100% no, he will never leave. And that's not just this year, that's any year. And I would say that with Andy Dalton, the chance of him not being our quarterback after next year, even if we have another playoff loss, the chance of Andy Dalton not being our quarterback is laying somewhere around 10%. So I would probably say no to both of those. But it's an excellent question from Sam, because it is a question that is often asked, especially about Dalton. I don't think many fans question the Marvin Lewis question because, like I said, if you follow the Bengals long enough, you know that Mike Brown doesn't fire coaches unless he absolutely has to. When it becomes a business decision of not selling personal seat licenses, not selling season tickets, then there's the chance. But as long as the Bengals are running a good program with a deep roster, Marvin Lewis is not going anywhere. Not anytime soon, unless they're going to move him up, as we previously discussed in another podcast, and they make him a GM. That would be the only way that Marvin Lewis would not be our coach. He would not be fired. He would just get moved up. But to answer Sam's second question, which is also a good question, which circles around Vontaze Burfict, who has the suspension to start the year, I think Vontaze already knows that he has to change his game. And to go from a young man at Arizona State where he was known for a lot of bad penalties and things of that nature, I think he has really changed his game a bit. Is he still a bit aggressive? Yes. Do we wish that we can transport Vontaze back 20 years and have him as our middle linebacker 20 years ago? Yes. But at this current day and age, he already knows he's going to have to change. Because, number one, he's already on a 3-game suspension. So if he comes back headhunting, the likelihood of getting a bigger suspension obviously is there on the horizon.
Yeah, they're going to be looking for it at that point.
Yeah, exactly. So the NFL's looking at him. So at this point, I would say Vontaze cleans his game up a bit. I still think he'll get a nice little penalty here and there just because of his aggressive style of play, which, to be personally honest with you, at least from the Pete and E podcast officially, I like the way Vontaze plays. I think it's something that the Bengals defense has been missing for a long time, and that is an enforcer, if you will, an enforcer in the middle who people have to really account for. I don't know if we've ever really had a middle linebacker like Vontaze Burfict, somebody who's going to come in and really change the game and make you really account for him on the X's and O's side. But, yeah, I to answer Sam's question, yes, I think you're going to see him calm down a bit. I still do think, and it's part of the maturity process, he's getting a little bit older. Yeah, I see him calming down a bit, especially now that the NFL kind of has a target on his back, kind of the way that the Steelers had with James Harrison before all the big rule changes came in about, playing tag football instead of tackle football. So the more that the league turns into a flag football league, which is where we're going, I think you're going to have to see players like Vontaze lower their expectations as far as how aggressive they can play.
Thanks, Erskine and Pete, for taking my call. I enjoyed listening to the show. Hey, Pete, this question is for you. What do you think our biggest loss was here in the off season? And the follow-up to that question is, how do you guys feel about us not reacting to going after any free agents here once
Okay.
again?
Well, thanks, Pat, for calling. We do appreciate hearing from you. It's nice to get a female caller to call on in and talk some Bengals football with you. It shows the growing interest in the NFL, especially from the female category. And we always like to have our calls, from lots of different people. So with that said, our biggest loss this year is Hugh Jackson. and that's easy. Hugh Jackson, I believe, is an incredibly good coach. He's an accomplished coach. He's somebody who's excellent with the X's and O's. We really now have to promote Zampese, and we really don't know what Zampese is going to bring to the table at this point. But I think there's no question that last year was probably the freshest offense we've seen here in a long time. I think that, Hugh Jackson's our biggest loss. As far as our reaction, not really going after free agents, I think that in this day and age, the rules are built around the fact that, you get compensatory picks if you lose free agents and you don't pick up any. And I think the Bengals really value their draft picks, which they should. I think our roster is deep enough at the current moment that we don't really need to overreact at free agency. The only thing we really lost a lot of is, we lost the two receivers. We lost Jones and we lost Sanu, which at the end of the day, both talented players, both, seem like great guys, great locker room guys. But at the rate of pay that they were getting from the Falcons and the Lions respectively, I just didn't see the need for us to keep either one. Neither one is a game breaker. And as much as I like Marvin Jones, I just thought that his weakness was at the point of attack when the ball hits the air. He just never really outfought a lot of corners. So, so like I said, losing the two receivers, is a move that was kind of necessary, if you will. And the Bengals actually went after Marvin Jones. So, and as much as we don't sign free agents from other teams, the other thing that most fans don't consider is, they say we don't sign anybody in free agency. Well, yeah, we did. We signed George Aloka, which is huge. We sign our own guys, and I think that's important because when the players get drafted and they come play here, it's important for them to know within our culture that if you sign a contract, that we're going to honor that contract. And so I think that, when everybody says, we don't sign free agents, it's like, yeah, we do. We sign our own. And I'd much rather sign somebody that we know than somebody that you don't know. You pay them a bunch of money, and you have no idea if they're going to come in and play well or not. So, yeah, we may not be as active as far as taking other players. And traditionally in the league, there's been a few players that have switched teams and have had a momentous impact. I mean, the first person that comes to mind is Reggie White when he signed with the Packers, I think it was. And, then all of a sudden their defense kind of turned around. But it's very rare that players of that caliber hit the free agent market. And then if you sign a guy and then you give him a whole bunch of money, but then he doesn't impact, then it really kills your salary cap. And then now, instead of signing people like George Aloka, now you lose him. I would say that I think the Bengals do just fine in free agency.
Hey, Pete. This is Doug from Detroit. Great Bengals fan. Got a question for you here. How do you think Andy Dalton's going to recover from his injury last season? Do you think he's going to come back and be the quarterback that we thought he would be and get us to the playoffs this year?
Well, that's a good question there. Diesel Doug from Detroit, the Triple D. Thank you for calling. We appreciate it. I think Andy Dalton will recover fine. I think the Bengals do pretty well with their training and rehab team. I think that Tom House, who Andy Dalton visits every offseason to kind of improve his mechanics, I think has a big thing to do with it. Andy Dalton broke his thumb, but at the same time, as long as it's healed properly, I don't see any reason why he shouldn't come back and be the same Andy Dalton he was previously. He didn't really tear or break anything super major. He didn't smash an ACL, and he didn't destroy his shoulder. He didn't destroy his elbow. Which, if it was one of those three things, then you would be, especially in the quarterback position, you would be very concerned. But just with a thumb injury, I have no doubt that Andy Dalton will come back at the beginning of the camp, and he'll be just like he was last year. I still think he leads us to the playoffs. And honestly, at this point, it's not more of the injury more than it is, can Andy Dalton develop any more than he did last year? Because he played great for us last year until he broke his thumb. And then obviously everything goes kaput from there. But the bottom line of it is I think Andy Dalton will be just fine. And keep holding it down for us in Detroit there. You know, we need all the fans we can get, and it's nice to see that Bengal land has expanded out a little bit. So we're happy to get your call. Thank you for calling, Mr. Doug.
Hey, what's up, guys? This is Mike in Fairfield. Got a question for you, Pete. The Bengals the last few years have been relatively inactive in free agency, just basically concentrating on their draft picks and promoting talent from within the organization. Do you think that strategy is good for them, or do you think that they should be more active in free agency and try to get players that can contribute
once again,
today?
I think this kind of goes back to a previous question, but we do appreciate you calling, Mike from Fairfield. I'm definitely familiar with Fairfield, and it's a good part of town, so thank you for giving us a call. I think there's definitely something to be said about a window being open so far. Our window's been open the last couple of years. We haven't taken advantage of that so that we can get over the hump. And sometimes players will say, or even fans will say, we need to sign that guy to get us over the hump. So at this point, I guess what I would challenge Bengals fans is, who's that guy? Who is that guy in free agency that you think can get us over the hump? Because once again, if you just start signing people just to sign people, then your salary cap gets kind of out of whack, and then you can't sign your good young players that you are drafting and developing yourself. So do you rob Peter to pay Paul? You know, do you put a lot of money into somebody else's player, but then lose the ability to sign your own guys, like the Georgia Loca contract that we mentioned previously? But I will say this, if there was a guy out there that can get us over the hump, whether it's offensively or defensively, honestly, I wouldn't mind us signing a kick returner so we can finally get through the Brandon Tate era, because Brandon Tate is just so average. But once again, you're right. We do seem to concentrate on our own development of our players and signing players in-house that fit our system. And I think that free agency has kind of proven that it's not an automatic that when you sign good free agents that you're going to be successful. I think the Eagles went through that when they signed all those players a couple of years back, and they had the so-called dream team that went nowhere. I think the Redskins tried that tactic many times in the early 2000s to no success. And if you want to look at really successful teams, you have to look at teams obviously like the Patriots. But here's the thing. The Patriots do sign a free agent here and there. They do go out and get an impact player either through trades or free agency from time to time. You can look back a couple of years ago when they picked up Darrelle Revis to kind of get them over the hump, if you will, when they traded with the Bengals to get Corey Dillon right before they won the Super Bowl some years back. The one thing about Bill Belichick, he's really good about knowing his roster and knowing if he can get something in the draft that will fill that roster spot. And if they can't, then they know who to go targeting. The Bengals, I think, could do a little bit more of that. But I just don't – I'm trying to think of any player that's been available the last few years that you would say to yourself, like, this guy can get us over the hump. And nobody's coming to mind. So I guess to answer the question, I wouldn't mind us seeing us pick up a free agent if they know that person can really help. But at the same time, I don't want the Bengals just taking free agents just to take free agents, and then next thing you know, you're stuck with a big contract for somebody who doesn't produce. We've done that in the past, Lavernius Coles and different receivers of that nature. So I guess I would have to say I'm kind of torn on that. You would like to get them over the hump, but at the same time, I really love the fact that the Bengals develop and sign their own players, because now players believe in the system, and they believe that if you sign a contract with the Bengals, that the Bengals are going to honor their end. And so I would say if somebody like a J.J. Watt became available, somebody who's a premier player, then, yeah, I think you go out and sign that guy. But as of right now, I just don't really see those kind of guys hit the market. They get signed up too early with their own respective teams. So unless it's an impact player, I'm not too worried about the Bengals not being active in free agency. I love the fact that we save our salary cap for our guys, because we do seem to be able to develop our guys. But the window is closing. You know, you can't keep a team in contention forever. And they basically wasted 4 years of a window that's wide open. So the question now is, how long is that window open? And will the Bengals eventually look up and say to themselves, the window might be closing a little bit. We may need to go out and get a guy or two to bring us over the hump. But I wouldn't say it's anything that I would be overly concerned about.
As always, follow us, hit us up on Twitter. Till next time.